By Ron Patton from Think About It website. Amidst the subtle cerebral circumvention of the gullible populace, through a multitude of manipulated mediums, lies one of the most diabolical atrocities perpetrated upon a segment of the human race, a form of systematic mind control which has permeated every aspect of society for almost 50 years. To objectively ascertain the following, one may need to re-examine preconceived ideologies relating to the dualistic nature of mankind. Resolving the philosophical question of whether we are inherently good or inherently evil is tantamount in shaping our perception of reality, specifically, the spiritual variable within the equation of life. This exposition is substantiated by declassified U.S. government documents, individuals formally connected to the U.S. intelligence communities, historical writings, researchers knowledgeable in mind control, publications from mental health practitioners, and interviews taken from survivors unwittingly subjected to a highly complex form of drama-based mind control known as Monarch programming. A word of caution for survivors of intensively systematic mind control and/or some form of ritualized abuse: there are numerous triggers in this article. It is therefore recommended not to read it unless appropriate support systems are in place or if you have a thoroughly reintegrated personality. A brief history of control. The mystery religions of ancient Egypt, Greece, India and Babylon helped lay the foundation for occultism, meaning hidden knowledge. One of the earliest writings giving reference to occultism is the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a compilation of rituals explicitly describing methods of torture and intimidation to create trauma, the use of potions, drugs, and the casting of spells, hypnotism, ultimately resulting in the total enslavement of the initiate. 1. These have been the main ingredients for a part of occultism known as Satanism throughout the ages. During the 13th century, the Roman Catholic Church increased and solidified its dominion throughout Europe with the infamous Inquisition. Satanism survived this period of persecution, deeply entrenching itself under the veil of various esoteric groups. In 1776, a Bavarian Jesuit by the name of Adam Weishaupt was commissioned by the House of Rothschild to centralize the power base of the mystery religions into what is commonly known as the Illuminati, meaning enlightened ones. This was an amalgamation of powerful occultic bloodlines, elite secret societies and influential Masonic fraternities, with the desire to construct a framework for a new world order. The outward goal of this utopia was to bring forth universal happiness to the human race. However, their underlying intention was to gradually increase control over the masses, thus becoming masters of the planet. The Anglo Alliance. By the 19th century, Great Britain and Germany were recognized as the primary geographic areas of Illuminati control. It then should be of little surprise to know the first work in behavioral science research was established in England in 1882, while much of the early medical and psychiatric techniques involved in mind control were pioneered at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was set up in London in 1921 to study the breaking point of humans. Kurt Lewin, a German psychologist, became the director of the Tavistock Institute in 1932, about the same time Nazi Germany was increasing its research into neuropsychology, parapsychology and multi-generational occultism. Interestingly, a progressive exchange of scientific ideas was taking place between England and Germany, most notably in the field of eugenics, the movement devoted to improving the human species through the control of hereditary factors and mating. The nefariously enigmatic union between the two countries was bonded, partly through the Order of the Golden Dawn, a secret society which consisted of many high-ranking officials in the Nazi Party and British aristocracy. Top SS Nazi officer Heinrich Himmler was in charge of a scientific project called Lebensborn, which included selective breeding and adoption of children, a peculiarly large number of twins among them. 2. The purpose of the program was to create the super race Aryans who would have total allegiance to the cause of the Third Reich, New World Order. Much of the preliminary experimentation concerning genetic engineering and behavior modification was conducted by Dr. Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz, where he coldly analyzed the effects of trauma bonding, eye coloring and twinning upon his victims. Besides the insidious surgical experimentation performed at the concentration camp, some of the children were subjected to massive amounts of electroshock. Sadly, many of them did not survive the brutality. Concurrently, brainwashing was carried out on inmates at Dachau, who were placed under hypnosis and given the hallucinogenic drug mescaline. During the war, parallel behavioral research was led by Dr. George Estabrook of Colgate University. His involvement with the Army, CID, FBI and other agencies remains shrouded in secrecy. However, Estabrook would occasionally slip and discuss his work involving the creation of HYPNO program couriers and hypnotically induced split personalities. 3. After WWII, the U.S. Department of Defense secretly imported many of the top German Nazi and Italian fascist scientists and spies into the United States via South America and the Vatican. The code name for this operation was Project Paperclip. 4. One of the more prominent finds for the U.S. was German General Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief of intelligence against Russia. Upon arriving in Washington, D.C. in 1945, Gellin met extensively with President Truman, General William Wild Bill Donovan, Director of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and Allen Dulles, who would later become the stalwart head of the CIA. The objective of their brainstorming sessions was to reorganize the nominal American intelligence operation, transforming it into a highly efficient covert organization. The combination of their efforts produced the Central Intelligence Group in 1946, renamed the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, in 1947. Reinhard Gellin also had profound influence in helping to create the National Security Council, from which the National Security Act of 1947 was derived. This particular piece of legislation was implemented to protect an unconscionable number of illegal government activities, including clandestine mind control programs. The evolution of Project MKULTRA. With the CIA and National Security Council firmly established, the first in a series of covert brainwashing programs was initiated by the Navy in the fall of 1947. Project Shatter was developed in response to the Soviets' successes through the use of truth drugs. This rationale, however, was simply a cover story if the program were to be exposed. The research focused on the identification and testing of such drugs for use in interrogations and the recruitment of agents. 5. The project was officially terminated in 1953. The CIA decided to expand their efforts in the area of behavior modification with the advent of Project Bluebird, approved by Director Allen Dulles in 1950. Its objectives were to 1. Discover a means of conditioning personnel to prevent unauthorized extraction of information from them by no means. 2. Investigate the possibility of control of an individual by application of special interrogation techniques. 3. Investigate memory enhancement. 4. Establish defensive means for preventing hostile control of agency personnel. In August 1951, Project Bluebird was renamed Project Artichoke, which evaluated offensive uses of interrogation techniques, including hypnosis and drugs. The program ceased in 1956. 3 years prior to the halt of Project Artichoke, Project MKUltra came into existence on April 13, 1953 along the lines proposed by Richard Helms, Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, DDCI, with the rationale of establishing a special funding mechanism of extreme sensitivity. 6. The hypothetical etymology of MK may possibly stand for mind control. The obvious translation of the German word control into English is control. 7. A host of German doctors, procured from the post-war Nazi talent pool, were an invaluable asset toward the development of MKULTRA. The correlation between the concentration camp experiments and the numerous subprojects of MKULTRA are clearly evident. The various avenues used to control human behavior under MKULTRA included radiation, electroshock, psychology, psychiatry, sociology, anthropology, graphology, harassment, substances, paramilitary devices, materials, LSD being the most widely dispensed material. A special procedure, designated MKDELTA, was established to govern the use of MKULTRA abroad. MKULTRA delta materials were used for harassment, discrediting or disabling purposes. 8. There were 149 subprojects listed under the umbrella of MKULTRA. Project Monarch has not been officially identified by any government documentation as one of the corresponding subprojects, but is used rather as a descriptive catchphrase by survivors, therapists, and possible insiders. Monarch may, in fact, have culminated from MKSEARCH subprojects such as Operation Spellbinder, which was set up to create sleeper assassins, i.e., Manchurian candidates who could be activated upon receiving a keyword or phrase while in a post-hypnotic trance. Operation Often, a study which attempted to harness the power of occultic forces, was possibly one of several cover programs to hide the insidious reality of Project Monarch. Definition and description. The name monarch is not necessarily defined within the context of royal nobility, but rather refers to the monarch butterfly. When a person is undergoing trauma induced by electroshock, a feeling of lightheadedness is evidenced, as if one is floating or fluttering like a butterfly. There is also a symbolic representation pertaining to the transformation or metamorphosis of this beautiful insect, from a caterpillar to a cocoon, dormancy, inactivity, to a butterfly, new creation, which will return to its point of origin. Such is the migratory pattern that makes this species unique. Occultic symbolism may give additional insight into the true meaning. Psyche is the word for both soul and butterfly, coming from the belief that human souls become butterflies while searching for new reincarnation. 9. Some ancient mystical groups, such as the Gnostics, saw the butterfly as a symbol of corrupt flesh. The angel of death, remember Mengele, in Gnostic art was portrayed crushing the butterfly. 10. A marionette is a puppet that is attached to strings and is controlled by the puppet master, hence monarch programming is also referred to as the marionette syndrome. Imperial conditioning is another term used, while some mental health therapists know it as conditioned stimulus response sequences. Project Monarch could be best described as a form of structured dissociation and occultic integration, in order to compartmentalize the mind into multiple personalities within a systematic framework. During this process, a satanic ritual, usually including Kabbalistic mysticism, is performed with the purpose of attaching a particular demon or group of demons to the corresponding altar. Of course, most skeptics would view this as simply a means to enhance trauma within the victim, negating any rational belief that demonic possession actually occurs. Altars and triggers. Another way of examining this convoluted victimization of body and soul is by looking at it as a complex computer program. A file altar is created through trauma, repetition and reinforcement. In order to activate trigger the file, a specific access code or password, cue or command is required. The victim survivor is called a slave by the programmer handler, who in turn is perceived as master or god. About 75% are female, since they possess a higher tolerance for pain and tend to dissociate easier than males. Subjects are used mainly for cover operations, prostitution and pornography. Involvement in the entertainment industry is notable. A former military officer connected to the DIA told this writer, "In the big picture, these people, Monarch victims, are in all walks of life, from the bum on the street to the white-collar guy." In corroboration, a retired CIA agent vaguely discussed the use of such personnel to be used as plants or chameleons for the purpose of infiltrating a designated group, gathering information and/or injecting an ulterior agenda. There are an inordinate amount of altars in the victim survivor, with numerous backup programs, mirrors and shadows. A division of light side, good, and dark side, bad. Altars are interwoven in the mind and rotate on an axis. One of the main internal structures, of which there are many within the system, is shaped like a double helix, consisting of 7 levels. Each system has an internal programmer which oversees the gatekeeper demons, who grant or deny entry into the different rooms. A few of the internal images predominantly seen by victims survivors are trees, the Kabbalistic tree of life, with adjoining root systems, infinity loops, ancient symbols and letters, spider webs, mirrors or glass shattering masks, castles, mazes, demons, monsters, aliens, seashells, butterflies, snakes, ribbons, bows, flowers, hourglasses, clocks, robots, chain of command diagrams, schematics of computer circuitry boards. Bloodlines and twinning. A majority of the victims' survivors come from multi-generational satanic families, bloodlines, and are ostensibly programmed to fill their destiny as the chosen ones or chosen generations, a term coined by Mengele at Auschwitz. Some are adopted out to families of similar origin. Others used in this neurological nightmare are deemed as expendable ones, non-bloodliners, usually coming from orphanages, foster care homes, or incestuous families with a long history of pedophilia. There also appears to be a pattern of family members affiliated with government or military intelligence agencies. Many of the abused come from families who use Catholicism, Mormonism, or charismatic Christianity as a front for their abominable activities, though members of other religious groups are also involved. Victims' survivors generally respond more readily to a rigid religious, dogmatic, legalistic, hierarchical structure because it parallels their base programming. Authority usually goes unchallenged, as their will has been usurped through subjective and command-oriented conditioning. Physical identification characteristics on victims' survivors often include multiple electrical prod scars and/or resultant moles on their skin. A few may have had various parts of their bodies mutilated by knives, branding irons, or needles. Butterfly or occult tattoos are also common. Generally, bloodliners are less likely to have the subsequent markings, as their skin is to remain pure and unblemished. The ultimate purpose of the sophisticated manipulation of these individuals may sound unrealistic, depending upon our interpretive understanding of the physical and spiritual realms. The deepest and darkest altars within bloodliners are purported to be dormant until the Antichrist is revealed. These New World Order altars supposedly contain callback orders and instructions to train and/or initiate a large influx of people, possibly clones or soulless ones, thereby stimulating social control programs into the new millennium. Non-biological twinning is yet another bizarre feature observed within Monarch programming. For instance, 2 young non-related children would be ceremoniously initiated in a magical, soul-bonding ritual so they might be inseparably paired for eternity, possibly another Mengele connection. They essentially share 2 halves of the programmed information, making them interdependent upon one another. Paranormal phenomena such as astral projection, telepathy, ESP, etc. appear to be more pronounced between those who have undergone this process. Levels of Monarch programming. 11 Alpha, regarded as general or regular programming within the base control personality, characterized by extremely pronounced memory retention, along with substantially increased physical strength and visual acuity. Alpha programming is accomplished through deliberately subdividing the victim's personality, which, in essence, causes a left brain-right brain division, allowing for a programmed union of L and R through neuron pathway stimulation. Beta, referred to as sexual programming. This programming eliminates all learned moral convictions and stimulates the primitive sexual instinct, devoid of inhibitions. Cat altars may come out at this level. Delta. This is known as killer programming, originally developed for training special agents or elite soldiers, i.e. Delta Force, 1st Earth Battalion, Mossad, etc. In covert operations, optimal adrenal output and controlled aggression is evident. Subjects are devoid of fear, very systematic in carrying out their assignment. Self-destruct or suicide instructions are layered in at this level. Theta considered to the psychic programming. Bloodliners, those coming from multi-generational satanic families, were determined to exhibit a greater propensity for having telepathic abilities than did non-bloodliners. Due to its evident limitations, however, various forms of electronic mind control systems were developed and introduced, namely, biomedical human telemetry devices, brain implants, directed energy lasers using microwaves and/or electromagnetics. It is reported these are used in conjunction with highly advanced computers and sophisticated satellite tracking systems. Omega, a self-destruct form of programming, also known as code green. The corresponding behaviors include suicidal tendencies and/or self-mutilation. This program is generally activated when the victim survivor begins therapy or interrogation and too much memory is being recovered. Gamma. Another form of system protection is through deception programming, which elicits misinformation and misdirection. This level is intertwined with demonology and tends to regenerate itself at a later time if inappropriately deactivated. Method and components. The initial process begins with creating dissociation within the subject, usually occurring from the time of birth to about 6 years. This is primarily achieved through the use of electroshock (ECT) and is at times performed even when the child is in the mother's womb. Due to the severe trauma induced through ECT, sexual abuse and other methods, the mind splits off into alternate personalities from the core. Formerly referred to as multiple personality disorder, it is presently recognized as dissociative identity disorder and is the basis for Monarch programming. Further conditioning of the victim's mind is enhanced through hypnotism, double-bind coercion, pleasure-pain reversals, food, water, sleep and sensory deprivation, along with various drugs which alter certain cerebral functions. The next stage is to embed and compress detailed commands or messages within the specified alter. This is achieved through the use of high-tech headsets, in conjunction with computer-driven generators which emit inaudible sound waves or harmonics that affect the RNA covering of neuron pathways to the subconscious and unconscious mind. Virtual reality optical devices are sometimes used simultaneously with the harmonic generators projecting pulsating colored lights, subliminals and split-screen visuals. High-voltage electroshock is then used for memory dissolution. Programming is updated periodically and reinforced through visual, auditory and written mediums. Some of the first programming themes included The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland, both heavily saturated with occultic symbolism. Many of the recent Disney movies and cartoons are used in a twofold manner, desensitizing the majority of the population, using subliminals and neurolinguistic programming deliberately constructing specific triggers and keys for base programming of highly impressionable Monarch children. A prime example of how subliminal programming works is by looking at the recent Disney cinematic sensation Pocahontas, curiously billed as their 33rd highest degree in Scottish Rite Freemasonry animated movie. In the movie, Grandmother Willow is a mystical 400-year-old tree who counsels the motherless Pocahontas to listen to her heart and help her realize all the answers lie within. Grandmother Willow is constantly talking in doublespeak and using reversals, i.e., sometimes the right path is not the easiest one, the esoteric derivative being the left path, the path that leads to destruction, is the easiest one. In Illuminati-structured MPD systems, the willow tree represents the occultic powers of Druidism. The intrinsic imagery of the tree's branches, leaves and root systems are very significant, as some of the dark spiritual properties associated with the willow tree programming are: 1. The branches are used to whip victims in rituals for cleansing purposes. 2. A willow tree can endure severe weather disturbances, i.e. storms, and is known for its pliability or flexibility. Victim survivors of the programming describe the willow's branches wrapping around them, with no hope of escape. 3. The deep root system of the willow tree makes the victim survivor feel as if they are falling deeper and deeper into an abyss while in a hypnotic trance. 12. Music plays an instrumental role in programming, through combinations of variable tones, rhythms and words. Frightmeister Stephen King's numerous novels and subsequent movies are purported by credible sources to be used for such villainous purposes. One of his latest books, Insomnia, features a picture of King with the trigger phrase, "We never sleep," indicative of someone with MPDDID below an all-seeing eye. A partial list of other mediums used to reinforce base programming are Pinocchio, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, The Lion King, E.T., Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Transformers 2, Batman, Bewitched, Fantasy Island reboot, Tiny Toons, DuckTales, The Dead Sea Scrolls, The Tall Book of Make-Believe. A few movies which depict or portray some aspect of Monarch programming are Hellraiser 3, Raising Cain, Labyrinth, Telephone, Johnny Mnemonic, Point of No Return, The Lawnmower Man and Closet Land. Programmers and places. It's difficult to figure out who the original programmer of this satanic project was, due to the substantial amount of disinformation and cross-contamination propagated by the powers that be. The two that went by the color-coded name of Dr. Green are a Jewish doctor named Dr. Grunbaum, who supposedly collaborated with the Nazis during WWII, and Dr. Joseph Mengele, whose trademark of cold-blooded and calculating brutality has not only scarred the souls of survivors from Auschwitz, but also a countless number of victims throughout the world. Mengele's direct involvement at the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp was suspiciously downplayed during the Nuremberg trials, and consequently no intensified effort by the US and its allies was directed toward his capture. 13. As a means to confuse serious investigators as to his whereabouts, U.S. officials would report Mengele being a non-threatening recluse in Paraguay or Brazil, or that he was simply dead. The angel of death miraculously must have come back to life at least 5 different times. His unprecedented research, at the expense of thousands of lives, undoubtedly was a significant bonus to U.S. interests. Besides using the pseudonym of Dr. Green, survivors knew him as Vaderchen, Daddy, Schoner Joseph, Beautiful Joseph, David and Fairchild. A gracefully handsome man of slight stature, Mengele would disarm people with his gentle demeanor, while at other times, he would explode into violent rages. 14. Other characteristics remembered by survivors were the cadence of his shiny black boots as he paced back and forth in his I-love-you/L-love-you-not daisy game. When he pulled off the last daisy pedal, he would maliciously torture and kill a small child in front of the other child he was programming. Distraught survivors also recalled being thrown naked into cages with monkeys, who were trained to viciously abuse them. Evidently, Mengele enjoyed reducing people to the level of animals. He also would purposely restrain his victims from crying, screaming, or showing any excessive emotion. Dr. D. Ewan Cameron, also known as Dr. White, was the former head of the Canadian, American and World Psychiatric Associations. Because of Cameron's extensive experience and credentials, the CLASL funneled millions of dollars throughout organizations like the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, which Cameron ruthlessly presided over. Experimentations were conducted at several locations in Montreal, mostly at McGill University, St. Mary's Hospital and Ellen Memorial Institute. Besides the conventional methods of psychiatric tyranny, such as electroshock drug injections and lobotomies, Cameron conceived the technique of psychic driving, wherein unsuspecting patients were kept in a drug-induced coma for several weeks and administered a regimen of electroshocks, while electronic helmets were strapped to their heads and repetitive auditory messages were transmitted at variable speeds. 15. Many of those exploited were abused children which had been run through the Roman Catholic orphanage system. Not surprisingly, Dr. Cameron has been conveniently left out of most psychiatric journals. This may have been, in fact, largely due to Project MKUltra being publicly exposed in 1970 through lawsuits filed by Canadian survivors and their families. The CIA and Canadian government settled out of court so as not to be required to officially admit to any wrongdoing. A former U.S. Army Lieutenant Col. in the DIA's Psychological Warfare Division, Michael Aquino, is the latest in a line of alleged government-sponsored sadists. Aquino, an eccentric genius obsessed with Nazi pagan rituals, founded the Temple of Set, an offshoot of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. Aquino was connected with the Presidio Army Base daycare scandal, in which he was accused of child molestation. Much to the dismay of the young victim's parents, all charges were dismissed. Codenamed Malcolm, Aquino was reported to have developed training tapes on how to create a monarch slave and worked as a liaison between government military intelligence and various criminal organizations and occult groups in the distribution of monarch slaves. 16. Heinrich Müller was another important programmer who went under the code names Dr. Blue or Gog. He apparently has 2 sons who have carried on the trade. The original, Dr. Black, was apparently Leo Wheeler, the nephew of deceased General Earl G. Wheeler, who was the commander of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs during the Vietnam War. Wheeler's protege, E. Hummel, is active in the Northwest, along with W. Bowers, from the Rothschild bloodline. Other alleged mastermind manipulators, past and present, are Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, Lieutenant Col. John Alexander, Richard Dabney Anderson, USN, Dr. James Monroe Drive, John Lilly, Lieutenant Commodore, Thomas Narek, Dr. William Jennings Bryan Drive, Bernard L. Diamond Drive, Martin T. Orne Drive, Louis J. West Drive, Robert J. Lifton Drive, Harris is Bell Col. Wilson Green. In order to keep MKUltra from being easily detected, the CIA segmented its subprojects into specialized fields of research and development at universities, prisons, private laboratories and hospitals. Of course, they were rewarded generously with government grants and miscellaneous funding. The names and locations of some of the major institutions involved in Monarch programming experimentation were Cornell, Duke, Princeton, UCLA, University of Rochester, MIT, Georgetown University Hospital, Maimonides Medical Center, St. Elizabeth's Hospital, Washington, D.C., Bell Laboratories, Stanford Research Institute, Westinghouse Friendship Laboratories, General Electric, Airco, Mankind Research Unlimited. The final product was usually created on military installations and bases, where maximum security is required, referred to as reprogramming centers or near-death trauma centers. The most heavily identified are China Lake Naval Weapons Center, the Presidio, Fort Detrick, Fort Campbell, Fort Lewis, Fort Hood, Redstone Arsenal, Alfred, AFB Patrick, AFB McClellan, AFB McGill, AFB Kirkland, AFB Nellis, AFB Homestead, AFB Grissom, AFB Maxwell, AFB Tinker. AFB Other places recognized as major programming sites are Langley Research Center, Los Alamos National Laboratories, Silverstock Institute areas in or by Mount Shasta, CA, Lamb, MO and Las Vegas, NV. Notable names. One of the first documented cases of a Monarch secret agent was that of the voluptuous 1940s model, Candy Jones. The book, The Control of Candy Jones, Playboy Press, portrays her 12 years of intrigue and suspense as a spy for the CIA. Jones, whose birth name is Jessica Wilcox, apparently fit the physiological profile as to be one of the initial experiments or human guinea pigs under the government's scientific project, MKUltra. The most publicized case of monarch monomania has surfaced through the book Transformation of America, The True Life Story of a CLA Slave by Kathy O'Brien. On the back cover it emphatically states, Kathy O'Brien is the only vocal and recovered survivor of the Central Intelligence Agency's MKULTRA Project Monarch Mind Control Operation, Red-related report. This documented autobiography contains compelling accounts of O'Brien's years of unrelenting incest and eventual introduction into Project Monarch by her perverted father. Along with co-author Mark Phillips, her rescuer and deprogrammer, Kathy covers an almost unbelievable array of conspiratorial crime, forced prostitution, white slavery with those in the upper echelons of world politics, covert assignments as a drug mule and courier, and the country western music industry's relationship with illegal CIA activities. Paul Bonacci, a courageous survivor who endured almost 2 decades of degradation under Project Monarch, has disclosed strong corroborating evidence of wide-scale crimes and corruption from the municipal state level all the way up to the White House. 17. He has testified about sexually abused males selected from Boys Town in Nebraska and taken to nearby Offwood AFB, where he says they were subjected to intense Monarch programming, directed mainly by Commander Bill Plemons and former Lieutenant Col. Michael Aquino. 18. After thoroughly tormenting the young boys into mindless oblivion, they were used, along with girls, for pornography and prostitution with several of the nation's political and economic power brokers. Bonacci recalled being transported from the Air Force Base via cargo planes to McClellan AFB in California. Along with other unfortunate adolescents and teenagers, he was driven to the elite retreat, Bohemian Grove. The perpetrators took full advantage of these innocent victims, committing unthinkable perversions in order to satisfy their deviant lusts. Some victims were apparently murdered, further traumatizing already terrified and broken children. An insatiable actress of marginal talent, now deceased, a morally corrupt TV evangelist, a heralded former Green Beret officer and a popular country western singer are a few others likely having succumbed to Monarch madness. Lee Harvey Oswald, Sirhan, Charlie Manson, John Hinckley Jr., Mark Chapman, David Koresh, Tim McVeigh and John Salvi are some notable names of infamy, strongly suspected of being pawns who were spawned by MKULTRA. Additional information about Kathy O'Brien. Deprogrammers and exposers. Dr. Corydon Hammond, a psychologist from the University of Utah, delivered a stunning lecture entitled Hypnosis and MPD, Ritual Abuse at the 4th Annual Eastern Regional Conference on Abuse and Multiple Personality, June 25, 1992 in Alexandria, Virginia. He essentially confirmed the suspicions of the attentive crowd of mental health professionals, wherein a certain percentage of their clients had undergone mind control programming in an intensively systematic manner. Hammond alluded to the Nazi connection, military and CIA mind control research, Greek letter and color programming and specifically mentioned the Monarch Project in relation to a form of operative conditioning. Shortly after his groundbreaking speech, he received death threats. Not wanting to jeopardize the safety of his family, Dr. Hammond stopped disseminating any follow-up information. Mark Phillips, a former electronic subcontractor for the Department of Defense, was privy to some of the top-secret mind control activities perpetrated by the U.S. government. His inquisitive demeanor, strong conscience and heartfelt concern for Kathy O'Brien, a presidential model under Project Monarch, prompted him to reveal the inner workings of this grand deception beginning about 1991. As the story goes, he helped Ms. O'Brien escape from her captors and was able to deprogram her in about a year's time in Alaska. The controversial Phillips has his share of critics who are skeptical of the veracity of his claims. New Orleans therapist Valerie Wolf introduced 2 of her patients before the President's Committee on Human Radiation Experiments on March 15, 1995 in Washington, D.C. The astonishing testimony made by these 2 brave women included accounts of German doctors, torture, drugs, electroshock, hypnosis and rape, besides being exposed to an undetermined amount of radiation. Both Wolf and her patients stated they recovered the memories of this CIA program without regression or hypnosis techniques. 19. Wolf presently devotes much of her time to counseling such survivors. A former labor attorney for Atlantic Richfield Company, David E. Rosenbaum, conducted a 9-year investigation, 1983-1992, concerning allegations of physical torture and coercive conditioning of numerous employees at an Arco plant in Monaca, PA. 20. His clients, Jerry L. Doty and Ann White, were victims of apparent radiation exposure, but as Mr. Rosenbaum probed deeper in the subsequent interview sessions, a Pandora's box was unveiled. His most astonishing conclusion was that Jerry Doty and Ann White were likely the offspring of Adolf Hitler, based in part on the uncanny resemblance from photos. Facial features, bone structure and size were taken into consideration. Rosenbaum also states, they both exhibit feelings and experiences that indicate they are twins. Doty and White were allegedly subjected to torture of many kinds while under drug-induced hypnosis, with each one undergoing at least 3 training techniques by plant physicians. Each victim was trained to enter into a hypnotic state upon the occurrence of specific stimuli, usually involving a cue, word or phrase, and trained to remember to forget what transpired in the hypnotic state. They were repeatedly subjected to identical stimulus response sequence to produce nearly automatic reactions to the particular status. MKULTRA veteran, Dr. Bernard Diamond, Dr. Martin Orne and Dr. Joseph Mengele regularly visited the Arco plant. According to Rosenbaum, the special conditioning of Doty and White was intended for the artificial creation of dual German personalities. Rosenbaum, who is Jewish, has maintained a deep friendship with the two, despite the seemingly precarious circumstances. Other renowned therapists involved in deprogramming are Cynthia Burtis, Pamela Monday, Steve Ogilvy, Bennett Braun, Jerry Mungadzzi and Colin Ross. Some Christian counselors have been able to eliminate parts of the programming with limited success. Journalists who have recently expounded on the subject matter in exemplary fashion are Walter Boart, Operation Mind Control, John Rappaport, U.S. Government Mind Control Experiments on Children, and Alex Constantine, Psychic Dictatorship in the USA. Conclusion. The most incriminating statement to date made by a government official as to the possible existence of Project Monarch was extracted by Anton Chaikin, a writer for the publication, The New Federalist. When former CIA Director William Colby was asked directly, "What about Monarch?" he replied angrily and ambiguously, "We stopped that between the late 1960s and the early 1970s. Suffice to say that society, in its apparent state of cognitive dissonance, is generally in denial of the overwhelming evidence of this multifarious conspiracy." Numerous victim survivors of Project Monarch are in desperate need of help. However, the great majority of people are too preoccupied with themselves to show any genuine compassion toward these severely wounded individuals. Apathy has taken over the minds of the masses, who choose to exist within the comforts of this world. Reality has thus become obscured by relativism and selfishness.